So, how did we get here? Why are we so polarized? What is going on? Well, as Unitarians, we like to ask questions, we get very little direction, and then you got to figure it out for yourself. So I have a few theories, and I'd like to share this with you. So first of all, I'd like to talk about another human condition, and that is confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is a psychological term for the human tendency to only seek out information that supports your position or idea. This causes you to have a bias towards your original position, because if you only seek out information that supports your idea, you will only find information that supports your idea. It is our tendency to cherry pick information that confirms our existing beliefs or ideas. Confirmation bias explains why two people with opposing views can see the evidence of a topic and then come away both feeling validated by it. And of course, where do we get our bias? Well, we already talked about that we're social creatures and that we learn these biases from the generations before us, as well as our own personal experiences. We let others dictate to us or influence us through these labels and what those labels mean. But one of the things that has really influenced us over the past 100 years for sure is the mass media. It has been a heavy influencer, and now, of course, social media affects all of us. So, with the elimination of the fairness doctrine during Reagan's administration, broadcast media outlets no longer needed to devote time to contrasting voices on issues of public importance. Then we had the advent of the 24 hours news cycle, which pushed media to be more sensationalized in order to keep viewers and therefore revenues up. And of course, the explosion of the social media in the past 20 years as platforms for people to share has created an unchecked means of mis- and disinformation spread as more Americans go online for their news. The result is that many Americans are now in self-selected information silos where they trust the news that they receive as confirmation of their beliefs, because all other news is fake, right? And where contrasting views on issues of public importance are never heard, and opinion pieces soon resonate as fact. So, why are we polarized? For me, it's as simple as the divide and conquer tactic. It's a strategy used by the powerful to keep the masses fighting amongst themselves so that they do not band to join against the powerful, which is typically a pretty small group. And despite what many of you are thinking, it is not a tactic solely used by one political party or the other, but it's also used by individuals. It's used by businesses, employers, governments, and institutions to keep the status quo or to gain power so that they can create their own status. This tactic is exploitation of people's emotions and not necessarily based on facts. We have seen it in the culture war attacks on women's rights, on non-white histories, on LGBTQ and trans individuals, on diversity, equity, and inclusion measures, on immigrants, and freedom of speech in our education institutions, and on our streets while we're protesting, all in the name of security, parental rights, preventing politicization of our educational system, and an indoctrination into a specific ideology. So we should ask, who or what benefits from this current polarization? Can our society withstand this level of polarization where neighbors look at each other as enemies? Or can our country? So I recently came across a quote that really summed up for me our current situation in the United States, and it goes, "This country has become, frankly, a warfare state built on affluence, a power structure in which the interest of big business, the obsessions of the military, and the phobias of political extremists both dominate and dictate our national policy. It also seems that people of the country are, by and large, reduced to passivity, confusion, resentment, frustration, thoughtlessness, and ignorance. so that they blindly follow any line that is unraveled for them by the mass media. This quote is from Thomas Merton in his 1963 book, The Cold War Letters. So now, while you're thinking about that, I'd like to take a station break to take your offering. Please be as generous as you can. Your gifts are what help us keep the lights on, the buildings intact, the staffing to keep it running smoothly, and programming to challenge you as well as bring you comfort. For those of you who are online or those who have a cell phone, there's a link to donate in the description on the YouTube video or on our website, run underneath today's service, or just use this handy QR code, which I think is up there now, on the screen or on the back of your order of service. So let the sacred time begin as we listen to For All We Know. Wow. All right, back to the heavy stuff. So what about our questions? Some people say that our current state of polarization is a result of the election of our first black president. And while I agree that seems to have fueled a heightened political rhetoric, demonization on both sides of those who don't think, act, or look like us, and the diminishment of trust in our credentialed experts and our institutions, and of course on our own democratic norms. I want to go back to the quote that I read to you, which seems to be just as relevant today. It was written in a time of polarization too. Could today's polarization be a long-standing backlash against the civil rights movement, where people of color, Latinos, women, and finally LGBTQ individuals gained some forward momentum, where the white majority's world was upended? What is the force behind our polarization? Is it a group of people or a few people trying to return us to a fascist democracy? Yeah, I said it, fascist democracy. How many of you think you know what fascism is? Raise your hand. Okay. So the U.S. has a long history of articulating a liberal democracy, while blacks, indigenous, and communities of color within the U.S. have often lived under a fascist state. Think about that. So yes, a fascist democracy. So the author Shane Burley describes fascism as a set of political practices fundamentally based on upholding rigid, identity-based hierarchies. And these hierarchies manifest as forms of supremacy depending on the country and the cultural context. So we know that the German Nazis looked to the Jim Crow laws of the U.S. as a model on how to oppress minority groups. Many of us know about the rise of Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy, that it was not a revolution by force, but was a revolution from the inside, playing on the emotions of the majority, using the media of the day to divide and conquer to gain power through their propaganda, making the majority feel as if they were being tyrannized and that the minorities were going to take over their life and their livelihoods, and that their government had abandoned them by not listening to their woes. The policies that they created were slow in coming, but they came, and they were able to oppress and kill those who disagreed with their regime. But more importantly for us, they were successful in getting long-standing neighbors to look at each other as enemies. So, I want to read another quote from a poster I recently purchased at the General Assembly by the artist Ricardo Levin Morales. It's called The Price of Silence. First, they came for the immigrants, and I did not speak up because I was not an immigrant. And then they came for the teenage mothers, and I did not speak up because I was not one of them. And then they came for the gays and the lesbians, and I did not speak up because I was not lesbian or gay. And then they came for the people of color, but as they left me alone, I did not speak up. They came then for the Jews, the elderly, the radicals, the farmers, the disabled, the trade unionist, the poor, the artist. But I believed that they were doing it for me, and I did not speak up. Then they came for me, and by then, there was no one left to speak up. I suspect that many of the German and Italian peoples felt the same way at the end of the war. So for our democracy and our society to continue, I believe it is imperative that we speak up and make sure that our Constitution, and especially our First Amendment rights, are not trampled. And not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors and those neighbors who we may not agree with. We need to do it for them, and we need to do it with them. Because if we don't, one of us may be the next target. So that's really kind of heavy stuff. So what can we do? Everybody just seems so angry and unwilling to be neighborly. How can we bridge this divide? So, as Dr. Weiss wrote, anger is a defense of the ego, a defense against fear. But anger is dissolved with understanding and love. When a negative emotion is understood, when its roots are illuminated, the energy behind that emotion diminishes and even disappears. So, as a young person, I thought that I could change my spouse. Anybody ever felt that way? I have learned over time that you cannot change anybody. You can influence them, but you cannot change them. So who is the person you can change? Yourself. Right, so let's just start there. If we're going to try to bridge this divide, let's start with ourselves. So, show of hands, have you ever been a sour grape? Are you a sour grape, or do you know somebody who's a sour grape? Okay, I've already admitted that. Are you holding on to a past grievance yourself? Can you let it go? Can you admit that you and everyone around you is imperfect and should be shown some grace? Can you ask questions in a humble and safe manner with curiosity and care in your heart instead of judgment, where you do nothing but listen? Can you be not defensive if you hear something that you find offensive? One of the best things I heard at GA this year was, we need to make our spaces messy, which means it's okay to mess up. If we can't be authentic, then we will never move forward together. Can you remember that disagreement on its own does not equal hate? Are you willing to build trust with your neighbor by being authentic and therefore vulnerable to others' judgments? Can you be aware of your position of privilege when you're speaking with others? Can you show care and compassion to your enemies? So it's not going to be easy, and it does take courage to bridge these divides, but I have a perfect example that I'd like to share with you. So one of our parents shared a story with me that I'm going to paraphrase, and hopefully I got it close to being right. So one of the neighbor boys who held a lot of influence in their small community paid another boy to beat up her son. Fortunately, the boy who was to do the beating confessed before any harm was done. But full of righteous distress, the mom walked to the neighbor's home to confront this behavior. Now, the neighboring family clearly did not hold the same political viewpoint as our parent, and on that day that she went to their home, they were having a party, and it was in progress. So the father was called to the door and immediately was in a defensive mode, ready to fight whatever the accusation was going to be. But instead of berating the son and the defensive father, she instead started the conversation by saying how much she loved his son, and that his son was a great kid, and that he was a leader in their neighborhood. Well, the father's defenses drooped a little bit. But, she continued, as a leader, his son needed to understand the responsibility of being a leader, and that the behavior of paying a child to harm another was not acceptable. That his peers look up to him to show them how to be good people. Well, by that time, the father was agreeing with her and immediately talked to the son about what was said. Both neighbors walked away happy with the results. Lead with love and care, not defensiveness. So the second example happened a few months ago. While I was enjoying breakfast at a local diner, I entered into a conversation with an older woman who was vocally espousing the typical conservative talking points. So, with curiosity and without judgment, I asked her why she felt the way she did, and I just listened. And even though I did not agree with her on most things, she did say something that got me thinking. We were talking about being woke and all that gay stuff, and she finally looked at me and said, "Look, I really don't care who you love. That's your business. I just don't want it shoved down my throat." So my first reaction was, oh, come on, get over it. But isn't that what white supremacists say to those who are marginalized? Was I as tone deaf as they are? Are we shoving down those who are just now accepting things that for their whole lives has been taboo? Are we as liberals and progressives placing the thoughts and feelings of those that we are allied with above others and ignoring the thoughts and feelings of those who don't agree with us? Are we the pot calling the kettle black? Aren't we all striving for the same thing? A sense of security, a comfortable lifestyle, and justice? Is there a place to find common ground where everyone feels heard and respected? And can we really accept diversity, including diversity of viewpoints? Lots of questions, I know. Not many answers, but you came to a Unitarian Universalist sermon. So, call me an optimist, but I think there is, and I really think that each of you has it in you to reach out to friends you have written off because of their viewpoints and to talk to strangers you don't know with a sense of love and care and curiosity. Because we are all connected. We are all the same. We are all rowing the same boat. And we are neighbors, not enemies. Thank you. So, let us have our closing hymn, number 346. Come sing a song with me. Rise if you are able. Thank you. Our closing words are from Outwitted by Edwin Markham. He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Let us now extinguish our chalice and say the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our heart until we are together again. May it always be so. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You're still on.
Yeah.